I'm Michael Anderson. I'm 34, and my own father tried to make me homeless by selling my house out from under me while I was 2,000 miles away. Before I tell you how his triumphant laughter turned into a dead, horrified silence, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. The air in the Chicago conference room was stale with the smell of lukewarm coffee and corporate ambition. I was halfway through a presentation on quarterly logistics when my phone buzzed on the table, face down. The vibration was a low, insistent hum against the polished wood. I ignored it. It buzzed again, a little longer this time. Then a third time, a persistent, angry vibration that seemed to echo in the quiet room. My boss, a man whose patience was measured in nanoseconds, shot me a look. It wasn't angry, just a tight little frown that said, "Handle it, now." I cleared my throat, murmured an apology to the team, and stepped into the echoing, marble-floored hallway. The caller ID glowed on the screen. Dad. A familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "Hey," I said, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "I'm in the middle of something important." His chuckle came through the speaker, oily and self-satisfied. It was a sound I'd come to dread, the sound of a man who enjoyed the discomfort of others, especially his own son. "Something important? More important than this? I just wanted to give you a heads up, son. You'll need to find a new place to live when you get back." I stopped breathing for a second. The ambient noise of the convention center, the distant chatter, the rolling of a luggage cart, faded to a dull hum. "What are you talking about?" "I sold the house," he said, and the words dripped with a smug, syrupy pleasure. "Got a great offer, Cash. Couldn't pass it up. Vanessa and I are starting our new life, a proper family life. You're out. The new owners take possession in 2 weeks. Enjoy homelessness." He laughed again, a short, barking sound that scraped against my ear. He was enjoying this. He wanted to hear me panic, to beg, to break. He wanted a reaction. I leaned my shoulder against the cool glass of the window, looking down 20 floors to the Chicago traffic below, a river of tiny, insignificant cars flowing in predictable lines. A strange, icy calm washed over me. It was the calm of a ship's captain seeing the iceberg dead ahead and knowing there's only one move to make. "Sounds good," I said, my voice perfectly even. The silence on his end was a victory. It was more satisfying than any shouting match could have been. He was waiting, baiting the hook for the explosion he craved. I didn't give him anything else. I just pressed the red icon on the screen and ended the call. For a full minute I didn't move. Then the rage, hot and acidic, burned its way up my throat. It wasn't a loud rage, but a quiet, trembling one. I walked quickly, my footsteps echoing, not back to the conference room, but to the men's restroom at the far end of the hall. I checked under the stalls. Empty. I locked the main door, turned, and punched the drywall once, hard. A spiderweb of cracks appeared around my knuckles, and a sharp, white-hot pain shot up my arm. I leaned my forehead against the cool, smooth surface of the mirror, my own reflection a stranger with wide, furious eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Then another. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking slightly. My knuckles were already starting to bleed, tiny red beads welling up on the scraped skin. I scrolled past my father's name, past my sister's, and landed on one I'd put on speed dial 6 months ago. "Thomas, my lawyer." He answered on the second ring. "Michael, everything okay?" "He did it," I said, my voice low and tight, barely a whisper. "He actually did it." There was a pause. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of him typing on his keyboard. "Okay," Thomas said, his voice all business, devoid of surprise. "I'll activate the plan." The flight back to California was the longest 5 hours of my life. The recycled air in the cabin felt suffocating. I didn't watch a movie. I didn't read the in-flight magazine. I just stared out the small, oval window at the endless, indifferent expanse of clouds, my mind replaying a scene from 6 months ago, right after my mother's funeral. The memory was so vivid it felt like it was happening all over again. The scene wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no tears. It was quiet, somber, and took place at the big, imposing oak desk in my mom's study, the one that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and old, cherished books. The air in the room was still heavy with her absence. I had presented my father with a thick folder, at least 50 pages, bound in a professional blue cover. On the front, in stark, bold letters, it read, Anderson Family Estate and Tax Optimization Plan. "What's all this junk?" he'd grumbled, flipping through it with a performative disdain. He hated paperwork. More than that, he hated any paperwork that was a reminder of my mother's meticulous, intelligent planning, a silent testament to the fact that she had always been the one who managed their world, while he just lived in it. I kept my voice steady and professional, just like Thomas had coached me. I had rehearsed this. "It's a comprehensive plan to protect the assets, Dad. Specifically, the house." Mom's accountant and Thomas drew it up before. I couldn't bring myself to say the word. "If the house remains in your name when you pass, the estate and inheritance taxes will be astronomical. We're talking nearly 50% of the property's value, gone. To the government." He squinted at a page dense with legal jargon, his lips moving as he tried to decipher it. "So I sign it over to you? Is that what this says?" The suspicion in his voice was thick. "Legally, for tax purposes, yes," I explained, pointing to the relevant section. "But it's just a strategy. Functionally, nothing changes for you. You still live there, you still control everything, it's still the family home. This is a legal shield. It classifies the transfer as a non-taxable gift. We handle a much smaller, manageable tax burden today, and the bulk of Mom's legacy, the home she loved, the home her parents built, is preserved for the future. It's what she wanted. Her name, her instructions, they're right there on the first page of the plan." That was the key. Thomas had called it the vanity play. My father saw the words tax, save money, and the undeniable authority of my mother's name, and his brain, clouded by greed and arrogance, switched off. He didn't see a transfer of power. He saw a clever trick he could play on the IRS. The idea that he was outsmarting anyone, even in death, appealed to his deep-seated vanity. He thought he was getting one over on the system. All right, whatever," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. He grabbed a pen from the holder on the desk, a silver one my mother had given him for their anniversary. He scribbled his signature on the half-dozen pages I'd marked with little yellow tabs. His signature a careless, jagged scrawl. He pushed the folder back across the desk at me. "Just get it done. As long as it saves us money." He hadn't read a single clause. He just saw a path to more money. And in his mind, my mother's legacy was just that, his money. Now, on the plane, the bitter irony was a stone in my gut. The very plan designed with love to save the family home was the one he'd so carelessly used to try and destroy it. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, pulling me from the memory. It was my sister, Emma, calling from across the country. I answered immediately. "Mike? What is going on?" Her voice was frantic, high-pitched with panic. "Dad just called me, ranting and raving. He was laughing, Mike. He said he sold the house and that you're trying to steal it from him. What is happening?" "Breathe, Em. Just breathe," I said, lowering my voice, conscious of the other passengers. "He didn't sell the house. He tried to. He can't. He legally can't." I explained everything. The tax plan, the legal transfer of the deed, the cold, hard fact that for the last 6 months, I had been the sole legal owner of our childhood home. She was silent for a long moment, a silence filled with the static of the long-distance call. Then she let out a sigh that was heavy with years of disappointment and resignation. "I knew it. I knew he'd do something like this. Ever since Mom died. He hasn't been different, has he? He's just louder about who he really is. He's been more himself than ever," I corrected her gently. "Especially since Vanessa moved in," she continued, her voice laced with disgust. "It's like he has to constantly prove something to her. Prove that he's the king of the castle. You know, Mom always used to say, He hated that the house was from her side of the family, from Grandma and Grandpa. He always felt like a guest there, even after 30 years. Like he was living in her shadow. That hit me like a physical blow. It was true. He'd always made jokes about it at family gatherings, calling it her palace. But underneath the humor, there was a bitter, resentful edge. He was a proud, insecure man living in a house that represented his wife's family history, not his. Marrying Vanessa, a woman with no connection to that past, and selling the house to start fresh, was his way of finally, brutally, wiping my mother's legacy off the map, and wiping me out along with it. I remembered Vanessa's first visit for Sunday dinner after the funeral. She'd walked through the house with a tight smile, her eyes scanning everything with a critical gaze. "Such a classic home," she'd said, running a finger over my mother's mahogany dining table. "A bit dark, though, isn't it? It would look so much brighter with some lighter furniture. Maybe a nice, modern gray on the walls." She had said it to my father, but she was looking right at me. It was a declaration of intent. "Don't worry, I said, my voice hardening. "I have it handled. Thomas is on it. Be careful, Mike, please. He's vicious when he's cornered." After we hung up, an email from Thomas popped up on my screen. Subject: Forward. Official correspondence. He had forwarded me copies of the certified letters that had been sent out that afternoon. Official. Intimidating letters on heavy bond paper from a Beverly Hills law firm, all saying the same thing in bold, unforgiving letters. Cease and desist. One was addressed to Richard Anderson. One was addressed to Vanessa Anderson. And the third, the one that made my plan feel real and dangerous, was addressed to a Mr. Curtis Webb at Webb Real Estate. Curtis, Vanessa's brother. Of course, it was a family affair. My father hadn't just decided to sell the house. He'd brought in his new family to carve it up, profit from it, and split the spoils. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy. Thomas's letter to Curtis was a masterpiece of legal brutality. It didn't just warn. It threatened. It mentioned fraudulent representation of ownership, willful misrepresentation for financial gain, potential license revocation by the California Department of Real Estate, and full exposure to both civil and criminal liability. Thomas wasn't just warning my father. He was putting the entire crooked little enterprise on notice. He was taking a scalpel to their plan. The plane began its descent into the sprawling lights of Los Angeles. I looked at my bruised and scraped knuckles. The pain was a dull throb, a physical anchor for the anger simmering just below the surface. My phone lit up one last time. It was a text from Emma. "He's telling everyone you're a thief, that you took advantage of a grieving old man. He's trying to ruin your name before you even land. Be ready for a fight, Mike." I wasn't a thief. I was my mother's son, and I was ready. The fight had already begun. I didn't go home right away. The thought of walking into that house, not knowing what I'd find, made my stomach clench. Instead, I drove through the familiar LA traffic to Thomas's office, a sleek, impersonal space in a Century City high-rise that felt a million miles away from the warm, lived-in chaos of the home my mother had built. The air smelled of expensive leather and ambition. He handed me a crisp, new copy of the deed, the original now safely filed away in a fireproof vault. My name was there in stark black ink, a declaration of war. Michael Anderson, an unmarried man, as his sole and separate property. "He has no legal standing, Mike," Thomas said, his face etched with a seriousness that offered little comfort. "None. Zero. But that doesn't mean he won't make this ugly. He's a cornered animal. He'll try to paint you as a monster, the greedy son who stole the roof from over his poor, grieving father's head. He already is," I said, my voice flat. "He's been playing that role for months." When I finally pulled my car onto my street, the street where I learned to ride my bike, the street that held every memory of my childhood, my heart hammered against my ribs. The neighborhood was quiet, sleepy in the late afternoon sun. But my house was not. There were signs of an invasion. Parked right in front of the house, blocking the driveway, was a hulking white van with Vinnie's Movers, written in peeling red letters on the side. On the front lawn, staked deep into the grass my mother had so carefully tended, was a realtor's sign. But it wasn't just any sign. It was a big, obnoxious one with a bright red banner slapped diagonally across the top, and on it, one word in huge, triumphant letters, sold, and standing next to it, talking on his cell phone with a smug grin plastered on his face, was a man in a cheap, shiny suit and too much hair gel. Curtis, Vanessa's brother. He saw my car, and his grin widened. He gave me a little mock salute, a gesture of utter contempt, before turning his back. I parked across the street and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel so hard my already bruised knuckles ached. This was real. They weren't waiting. They weren't wasting a single second. They were actively, gleefully erasing my life. I got out of the car, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and walked up the familiar stone path. The front door was wide open, a gaping wound. The first thing I saw was my mother's antique coat rack, a beautiful piece of dark cherry wood that she'd inherited from her mother. It had been tossed unceremoniously onto the porch, lying on its side like a dead animal. In its place, the hallway was bare, the wall scarred where it had been ripped away. I stepped inside. The scene in the living room stopped me cold. Vanessa was there, a tape measure in her hand, directing two burly movers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "No, no, over there," she was saying, her voice sharp with unearned authority. She pointed to the empty space where my mom's favorite floral armchair used to be. "The new leather sectional is going there. All of this old stuff, it has to go. To the curb." She was pointing at my entire childhood. The scuffed oak coffee table where I'd spent countless hours doing my homework. The towering bookshelf my grandfather had built by hand. Every shelf filled with books my mother had collected over a lifetime. The small, hand-painted side table where she always kept her cup of tea. My mother's things, our things. They weren't just moving furniture. They were desecrating memories. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice came out louder than I expected, sharp and hard, echoing in the suddenly silent room. Vanessa turned, and a fake, bright smile was instantly plastered on her face. It didn't reach her cold eyes. "Michael, you're back early. We're just making a little room, getting a head start on the packing for you. We wanted to make the transition as smooth as possible." The two movers looked between us, their faces blank but their bodies tense. They set down the lamp they were holding and shuffled their feet, suddenly very interested in the floorboards. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously low and quiet. I looked directly at the movers. "Both of you, your work here is done." The movers didn't need to be told twice. They exchanged a quick glance, nodded, and practically ran out of the room, glad to be escaping the crossfire. Vanessa's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "Now, Michael, there's no need to be rude. Your father and I are just trying to get things in order dash." "Where is he?" I cut her off. I didn't have the energy to argue with her. She was just a symptom of the disease. "He's in the kitchen, on a business call," she said, her voice turning sharp and defensive. "And you will not speak to me that way in my own house." "That's the thing, Vanessa," I said, taking a deliberate step closer, invading her space. "It isn't your house." Just then, my father walked in from the kitchen, a cordless phone pressed to his ear. He saw me and his face broke into that same triumphant, hateful smirk from the phone call. "Ah, he's back. Honey, is he giving you trouble?" He turned his attention back to the phone. "Hey, gotta go, talk later." He clicked it off and tossed the phone onto the mantelpiece with a clatter. "Good you're here. You can start packing up your room. Don't want to leave a mess for the new owners, do we? Be a man about it." The three of us stood there, a triangle of hate and history in the middle of the living room. The air was thick with unspoken resentments, heavy enough to choke on. "You need to leave," I said, my gaze locked on my father. "You, her, and her greasy brother out on the lawn. You have 5 minutes to get off my property." He laughed, a full-throated, arrogant, disbelieving laugh. He truly believed he was invincible. Your property? Kid, I think the flight scrambled your brains. This is my house. My name is on the mortgage. And I sold it. You have no say in the matter. You're a guest here, and your stay is over. You can't sell what you don't own, I said calmly, the words like chips of ice. Before he could respond with another insult, the doorbell rang, a cheerful two-note chime that was grotesquely out of place. My father, annoyed at the interruption, stormed over and yanked the door open. Standing on the porch was an older couple, probably in their late 60s, looking confused and anxious. The man clutched a briefcase, the woman a thick envelope. Mr. Anderson? The man said, his voice polite but firm. We're the Jenkins, Harold and Martha. We were supposed to meet with your agent, Mr. Webb, for a final walkthrough. But we just got a very alarming letter from an attorney. It says the sale might be invalid. My father's face paled, just slightly, but enough for me to see. The color drained from around his mouth. He shot a furious, venomous look at me. It's a misunderstanding, he snarled, turning back to the couple, his voice a low growl. A family squabble. My son is being difficult. Please, come in, come in. The Jenkinses stepped hesitantly inside, their eyes wide as they took in the tense scene. Me standing like a statue, Vanessa wringing her hands, my father practically vibrating with rage. Now we were a pentagon of dysfunction. I think, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me, that it's time everyone saw the paperwork, so we can clear up this little misunderstanding, once and for all. Richard's eyes narrowed to slits. He still thought he had the upper hand. He thought this was a bluff, a desperate, childish move. He looked from me to the nervous couple, to his frantic wife, and back to me, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Fine, he spat, his voice full of contempt. You want to play games? Let's play games. Show us your little arts and crafts project. I turned and walked toward the study, my heart pounding a steady, defiant rhythm against my ribs. Enough games, I said without looking back. Everyone will wait right here. I'll be right back with the deed. The short walk down the hall to the study felt like a mile. Each footstep on the hardwood floors my mother had so lovingly polished seemed to echo the pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was a reckoning. This was about drawing a line in the sand of my own life, a line my father would not be allowed to cross. I closed the heavy oak door to the study behind me, the soft, solid click of the latch shutting out the suffocating tension that filled the rest of the house. For a moment there was peace. The room was exactly as my mother had left it, a sanctuary of quiet intellect and warmth. Her reading glasses were still on top of a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird by the armchair. Her presence was a comforting ghost, a source of strength. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of old paper and her faint rose-scented perfume, and steadied myself. My briefcase was on the floor where I'd left it that morning before my flight, a lifetime ago. I knelt, my hands surprisingly steady as I clicked open the brass latches. Inside, nestled in a protective plastic sleeve, was the deed Thomas had given me. The weapon, the truth. As I picked it up, the crisp paper cool against my skin, my eyes fell on a photograph in a silver frame on the corner of the desk. It was me and my dad, taken 20 years ago at a Dodgers game. I was a skinny, 12-year-old kid with a goofy, toothy grin, drowning in a jersey that was 3 sizes too big for me. He had his arm around my shoulder, pulling me in close, and he was smiling. A real smile, a genuine, happy smile that reached his eyes. Not the smug, cruel smirk he wore now. For a split second, a wave of grief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. It wasn't for the man in the living room, the angry, bitter stranger who was my father. It was for the father in that picture. The man who taught me how to throw a curveball, the man who stayed up late to help me with my math homework. The father I thought I had, the father I had lost long before my mother died. Was I going too far? Was there another way? A small, desperate voice in my head, the voice of that 12-year-old boy, pleaded for a different outcome. But it was drowned out by another voice, a voice that sounded a lot like my mother's, calm and resolute. He made his choice, Michael. Years ago. Now you have to make yours. The doubt was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my own family. What would be left when the dust settled? I felt a sudden, overwhelming need to connect with someone outside the blast radius, to hear a voice that wasn't seeped in years of toxicity and pain. My fingers, acting on their own, found my phone and dialed a number from my recent calls list. Olivia, my colleague, the one who had looked at me with such genuine, uncomplicated concern when I'd bolted out of the conference room. She answered right away, as if she were expecting my call. Michael, are you okay? I heard you had a family emergency. Hey, I said, my voice cracking slightly on the single word. I cleared my throat, embarrassed. Yeah, I'm home now. It's a mess. I didn't know what else to say. How could I possibly unload the whole insane, sordid story on her? You don't have to tell me the details, she said, her voice warm and calm, a life raft in my churning sea of emotions. I just wanted to say something. I've worked with you for 3 years, Michael. I've seen you handle stress, deal with difficult clients, and manage impossible deadlines. You are the most decent, level-headed, and fair person I know. Whatever is happening, and whatever you feel you have to do, I trust you. I trust that you have a good reason. So don't you dare doubt yourself. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, hot and sharp. It was exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't pity. It wasn't advice. It was a simple, powerful statement of faith. It was a reminder of who I was, outside of the toxic role I was forced to play in my father's drama. It was validation. Thank you, Olivia, I whispered, my voice thick. You have no idea how much that means to me right now. Of course, she said softly. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. Even if you just need someone to sit on the phone and say nothing. We hung up. I stood up from my kneeling position, the knot in my stomach gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was right. I was a decent person, and a decent person protects the things and people they love. They protect the legacy of a mother who deserved better. They stand up to bullies, even when that bully shares their blood. I picked up the deed. The crinkle of the paper was the only sound in the silent room. I looked at the photograph one last time, at the ghost of a lost father and a smiling, innocent boy. I said a silent goodbye to both of them. Then I turned, opened the study door, and walked back into the storm. My face was a mask of calm determination. The time for doubt was over. The time for truth had come. When I walked back into the living room, the silence was so thick you could taste the metallic tang of fear in it. 5 pairs of eyes were locked on me, each filled with a different brand of anxiety. My father's was defiant and challenging, a weak king puffing out his chest. Vanessa's was impatient and greedy, her eyes darting from me to the document in my hand. The Jenkins couple's was worried and weary. They just wanted the truth. And Curtis's was the pure, unadulterated terror of a cornered rat. He had subtly shifted his position closer to the front door, looking for an escape route. I didn't say a word. I walked to the coffee table, my mother's coffee table, and placed the document down in the center of it, smoothing out the single, powerful page with my hand. The official, embossed seal of the County of Los Angeles was at the top, imposing and undeniable. As I said, I began, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension. There's been a serious misunderstanding, Mr. Anderson here. I gestured to my father with a cool, deliberate detachment. Has been operating under the impression that he is the owner of this property. He is mistaken. My father let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound of pure contempt. Mistaken? Michael, what is this, a community college theater project? Are you insane? Did you print that up at Kinko's this morning? I ignored him completely, refusing to engage with his pathetic taunts. I turned my full attention to the Jenkinses, the only innocent parties in the room. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, I am truly and deeply sorry that you've been dragged into this family issue. The man who tried to sell you this house, who took your deposit, who wasted your time and your hopes, has not been its legal owner for the past 6 months. I picked up the deed from the table and held it out for them. I am Harold Jenkins, a man with tired eyes and a firm, no-nonsense set to his jaw, took the document from me. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket and put them on. He and his wife leaned in, their heads close together, their fingers tracing the lines of text. I watched their expressions shift in slow motion, from confusion to dawning comprehension, to a flicker of disbelief, and then to a quiet, simmering anger. "Well, I'll be," Harold murmured, looking over his glasses at me, and then at my father. "It says it right here, Richard," Martha Jenkins said, her voice sharp as steel as she looked up, her gaze pinning my father to the spot. "Transfer of title, recorded with the county on March 12th. Sole owner, Michael Anderson. Signed over 6 months ago." The color drained from my father's face. It was a visible, shocking transformation. The blotchy, arrogant red was replaced by a pasty, sickly white. He snatched the paper from their hands, his eyes scanning it frantically, desperately. This is fake. A forgery. You tricked me. You took advantage of me when I was grieving," he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me, his voice cracking. "I didn't trick you, Dad," I said, and the word Dad tasted like ash in my mouth. "I presented you with a comprehensive 50-page estate plan. I explained its primary purpose. You chose not to read it. You were too busy calculating how much money you'd save in taxes to be bothered with the details. This is not my fault. This is the consequence of your own greed." Vanessa finally exploded. The mask of the gracious, supportive hostess shattered into a million pieces, revealing the greedy, panicked woman beneath. "What does this mean, Richard?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "What did you do? You promised me this house. You promised me a fresh start, a new life." She whirled on Curtis, her face contorted with rage. "And you're the real estate agent. You were supposed to check the title. You told me everything was clear. You get paid a commission to know these things." Curtis, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper, began to sweat profusely. A single bead traced a path down his temple. I ran the preliminary title report," he stammered, his voice weak. "It must not have been updated in the county system yet. Can take time." Richard assured me he was the sole owner. I took him at his word. "Because I am the owner," my father roared, his face turning a blotchy, furious red again. He was losing control, a wild animal thrashing in a trap of his own making, and everyone could see it. It was in that precise moment of chaos that the front door, still slightly ajar, swung open silently. My Uncle Pete stood on the threshold, my father's younger brother. He was a quiet man, a carpenter, with hands that were calloused and capable, and an honesty that was as solid as the oak he worked with. He and my mom had always been close, a bond of mutual respect that my father had always resented. "Pete!" my father exclaimed, a wave of desperate relief flooding his voice. He saw an ally, a reinforcement. "Thank God. Tell these people. Tell my son. This is my house. Tell them." Uncle Pete didn't even look at my father. His eyes, sad and knowing, scanned the room, taking in the entire, ugly scene. The half-empty space, the frantic faces, the crumpled document clutched in my father's hand. His gaze finally settled on the corner where a few of my mother's most precious things. A small, hand-painted jewelry box, her favorite cashmere throw blanket, had been carelessly piled on the floor like trash. Slowly, deliberately, he walked over to the pile. He knelt down, his movements unhurried and reverent. He picked up the blanket, shook out the dust, and folded it with a gentle, loving precision. He then picked up the small jewelry box and placed it back on the mantelpiece, exactly where it always sat. He didn't say a single word, but his actions screamed his allegiance. He was restoring order. He was honoring his sister-in-law. He was choosing a side. When he was done, he turned to me. His eyes were sad, but there was a flicker of pride in them. He walked over and stood next to me, a silent, solid presence at my shoulder. Then, and only then, did he look at my father, his face a mask of profound disappointment. "She knew, Richard," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent room with the weight of absolute truth. "Your wife, my sister. She knew you better than you knew yourself." He put a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "She would be proud of you, Michael." That was it. That was the final blow. The endorsement from the one family member my father couldn't bully, bribe, or dismiss. Richard stared at his brother, then at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The fight, the arrogance, the bluster, all of it drained out of him, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated defeat. He had lost, and everyone in the room knew it. The aftermath was a slow, awkward, and deeply satisfying unraveling. Richard and Vanessa left without another word. He couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor, a broken, diminished man. Vanessa, however, shot me a look of such pure, concentrated venom as she walked out that I thought it might actually leave a scorch mark on the wall. Curtis scurried out after them like the rat he was, muttering about calling his lawyer. His shiny suit now rumpled and stained with sweat. The Jenkinses were the last to leave. They handed the deed back to me, their anger at my father now softened into a quiet sympathy for me. "We are so sorry for your loss, young man," Martha said, her voice gentle as she patted my arm. "Your mother, it's clear she was a very wise and far-sighted woman. As for your father," Harold added, his voice grim and resolute, "he'll be hearing from our attorney. We pulled our offer on another property to take this one, based on his and Mr. Webb's fraudulent assurances. We lost out on our dream home because of their lies. This isn't over for them. Not by a long shot." I thanked them, my voice hoarse, and closed the door. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was alone in my own home. The silence was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare floors. I touched the empty spaces on the walls where pictures used to hang, the faint outlines a ghostly reminder of what had been stripped away. Uncle Pete had left as quietly as he'd arrived, just giving my shoulder a firm, understanding squeeze before he went. The emptiness felt both like a victory and a profound loss. The next few days were a blur of logistics, a necessary but joyless reclaiming of my own life. I had the locks changed, the satisfying click of the new tumblers a declaration of new ownership. I called the moving company Vanessa had hired and informed the owner, Vinny, that if any of his employees set foot on the property again, I would consider it trespassing and have them arrested. He was surprisingly understanding. I started the slow, painful process of trying to put things back in some semblance of order, sorting through what was left, what was broken, and what was simply gone. The phone calls from my father started 2 days later. The first one was just a string of shouted threats and insults, a desperate barrage of impotent rage. I listened for a moment, then calmly hung up. The second one, a day later, was different. He sounded weary, defeated. He tried a new tactic, emotional blackmail. "How could you do this to your own father, Michael?" he'd asked, his voice thick with a fake, theatrical emotion. "After everything I've done for you, this house, it has so many memories. Remember when we built that treehouse in the backyard, just the two of us? Remember teaching you to ride a bike on this very driveway? How can you throw all that away?" "I remember," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a block of ice. "I also remember you trying to sell those memories for cash so you could move your new wife in. Which memory do you think is a little stronger in my mind right now?" I hung up before he could answer. His next move was even more insidious, more manipulative. He sent my younger half-brother, Jason, over as a sacrificial lamb. Jason was a good kid, only 19, and he adored me. He'd always looked up to me. He showed up at my door looking miserable and conflicted, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad sent me," he mumbled, kicking at a loose stone on the porch. He said you're kicking him out on the street. that you stole the house from him when he was sad about Mom. Mike, is it true? I sighed, my anger at my father flaring for using this kid as a pawn. I put an arm around Jason's shoulder and invited him in. I didn't give him all the ugly details. He didn't need that burden. I just told him it was a complicated legal issue between me and Dad, a mess that Mom had tried to prevent. I assured him that my relationship with him, Jason, would never, ever change. He was my brother, and this house would always be open to him. He looked immensely relieved, but the fact that my father had weaponized our relationship, forcing his youngest son to fight his battles, filled me with a fresh wave of disgust. The final escalation came a week later. It arrived not as a phone call or a visitor, but as a quiet, deadly email. It was from my boss, Mark. The subject line was deceptively simple. A quick word. The email was short and professional, but the message was chilling. Michael, hope you're doing well after your family emergency. I need to talk to you when you have a moment. I've received some troubling reports from an anonymous source regarding a personal legal matter of yours. We can discuss it when you get back to the office, but I wanted to give you a heads up that HR has been made aware of a potential issue involving accusations of elder abuse and financial fraud. My blood ran cold. Elder abuse. Fraud. He wasn't just attacking my home anymore. He was coming for my livelihood, for my reputation, for my future. He was trying to burn my entire life to the ground. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. This was a new kind of war, a public one I wasn't sure I knew how to fight. The first person I called after reading that soul-crushing email wasn't my lawyer. It was my best friend, Derek. I read him the email, my voice shaking with a rage that felt colder, sharper, and more dangerous than anything I had felt before. This was a line that should never have been crossed. That son of a bitch, Derek said, his voice a low growl. There was a pause, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. Okay, don't panic. He's flailing. This is the last, desperate act of a drowning man. Mike. He's trying to pull you under with him. You know what we're going to do? We're going to get to work. The next day, a Saturday, Derek showed up at my house with his beat-up pickup truck. The bed was full of tools. Crowbars, sledgehammers, saws. He was also carrying 2 large pizzas and a 6-pack of beer. He had a determined look on his face. First things first, he announced, walking straight past me and into the kitchen. He surveyed the old, dark wood cabinets and the cracked linoleum floor with disgust. Your mom always wanted to renovate this kitchen. She told me 100 times. Said the cabinets were depressing and the floor was a tragedy. Your father always said it was too expensive. Well, he's not here now. He handed me a crowbar. So, we're tearing out the cabinets. And just like that, we started. We spent the entire weekend covered in a thick layer of sawdust and drywall dust. We tore out the old, dark, grease-stained cabinets my father had refused to replace for 20 years. We ripped up the cracked, yellowed linoleum floor, revealing the solid oak floorboards beneath. It was hard, exhausting, physical work, and it was the best therapy in the world. With every swing of the sledgehammer, with every screech of a nail being pulled from old wood, I felt like I was breaking down more than just plaster and wood. I was breaking down the old, oppressive, negative energy that had filled this house for years. I was tearing out the rot. On Sunday evening, as Derek and I were admiring the newly empty space, a blank canvas of possibility, the doorbell rang. It was Olivia, holding a large, insulated grocery bag that smelled incredible. I figured you guys might be tired of pizza, she said with a small, knowing smile. She looked past me at the demolished kitchen, her eyes widening. Wow, you weren't kidding about starting fresh. She'd brought homemade lasagna, a big green salad, and a loaf of garlic bread. We ate it sitting on the floor of the empty dining room, using moving boxes for a table and paper towels for napkins. It was one of the best meals of my life. In the easy quiet of the evening, I found myself telling her about the email from my boss, the accusations of fraud and elder abuse. I expected sympathy, or maybe even a little bit of hesitant distance. What I got was a game plan. She put down her fork, her expression turning serious and focused. My older sister is an HR director for a big tech company. she said, her voice firm. These kinds of malicious smear campaigns happen, especially in messy divorces or family disputes. The key is to get ahead of it professionally and decisively. You need to document everything. Write a clear, concise, emotion-free timeline of events. No accusations, no anger, just facts. Attach a copy of the deed. Attach a copy of the letter from the Jenkins lawyer threatening legal action against your father for fraud. You present it to your boss and HR not as a defense, but as a professional courtesy. You frame it as informing them of a private, malicious family matter that your father is unfortunately attempting to bring into the workplace. Her advice was a lifeline. It was practical, intelligent, and powerful. It took the power away from my father and put it back in my hands. For the next hour, she helped me draft the email on my laptop, choosing words that were professional, firm, and unimpeachable. Her presence was calming, her mind sharp. In that moment, sitting on the dusty floor eating lasagna, I realized this was more than just a friendship. It was a partnership, born in the middle of the wreckage of my life. The next morning, with a deep breath, I sent the email. My boss, Mark, replied within an hour. His response was short and to the point. Michael, thank you for your professionalism and transparency. This clarifies things completely. This is clearly a personal matter and has no bearing on your standing here. Consider the matter closed. We'll see you tomorrow. The relief was so immense it made me dizzy. My father's last weapon had been disarmed. And it was then, when he realized he had truly lost all control, that he finally, irrevocably snapped. It happened 2 nights later. I was in the living room, sketching out plans for the new kitchen on a notepad, when I heard shouting from the front yard. A raw, ugly, drunken sound that cut through the quiet night. I went to the window and looked out. A car was parked haphazardly at the curb, one wheel on the grass. My father was staggering on the lawn, his face bloated and red in the moonlight. And with him, looking just as drunk and desperate, was Curtis. You did this? My father was roaring, jabbing a clumsy finger in Curtis's chest. You were supposed to be the expert, the hotshot real estate agent. Now I'm being sued, and it's all your fault. My fault, Curtis yelled back, his voice cracking with panic and booze. You lied to me. You swore the house was yours. My license is on the line because of you, you old fool. You've ruined me. It was a pathetic, ugly scene. 2 greedy men, their crooked scheme in ruins, turning on each other like the rats they were. Lights started flicking on in the houses up and down the street. I saw my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, a woman who had known me since I was born, peer through her curtains, her face a mixture of alarm and disgust. I didn't move. I just watched from the darkness of my living room. This was the inevitable conclusion. This was the public implosion of their lies, playing out for the whole neighborhood to see. The shouting escalated until my father shoved Curtis. Curtis shoved him back, hard. They stumbled around on the lawn, a drunken, clumsy ballet of failure and recrimination. And then I saw Mrs. Calloway step away from her window, a phone pressed to her ear. Minutes later, the quiet suburban street was filled with the flashing red and blue lights of a police car pulling up to my curb. The sight of 2 uniformed police officers talking to my father on my front lawn, their faces stern and impatient, was the final, surreal chapter of his downfall. There were no arrests, just a stern warning about disturbing the peace and an offer to call a cab. But the public humiliation was absolute. He had lost his house, he had lost his dignity, and now, under the flashing lights of a police car, he had lost any shred of respectability he had ever claimed to possess. The next day, I drove to a small, neat house an hour outside the city, a house I hadn't visited in years, the house where my grandmother Eleanor, my mother's mother, lived. We had been estranged for years, not out of anger, but out of a shared, unspoken grief and her profound inability to stand being in the same room as my father. She opened the door, a tiny woman with my mother's fierce, intelligent eyes. She looked at me for a long moment, and then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. I heard there was some excitement on your street last night, she said. her eyes twinkling. "Come in, Michael. I've been waiting for you." 6 months later, my house was unrecognizable. It wasn't just renovated. It was reborn. New paint on the walls, new, gleaming hardwood floors, and a bright, beautiful new kitchen that was the undisputed heart of the home. The ghosts had been replaced by sunlight. The air, once thick with 30 years of tension, now smelled of fresh coffee, sawdust, and new beginnings. I was hosting a housewarming party. It wasn't a big, loud affair. It was quiet, intimate. It was just a gathering of my real family. Derek and his wife were leaning against the new, sprawling kitchen island I'd built, laughing with Olivia. My sister Emma was there, her suitcases already unpacked in the guest room. She'd decided to move back to town to be closer. Uncle Pete was in the backyard, a master at the grill, looking more at peace than I'd seen him in years. And in the most comfortable armchair in the living room, a new one that I had bought, holding court and telling a story, was my grandmother Eleanor. She had become a fixture in my life again. Our weekly visits had become my anchor, filling in the empty spaces in my mother's story, painting a fuller picture of the woman she was. It was during one of those visits, over cups of tea in her sun-drenched kitchen, that she'd given me the final piece of the puzzle, the true meaning of my inheritance. I had been telling her how brilliant Mom's plan was, how she had perfectly anticipated that Dad, in his greed, would try to sell the house. Grandma had shaken her head, a sad, wise smile on her lips. "Oh, Michael, you're only seeing half of it. Your mother knew your father, yes. She knew selling the house was a possibility. But that wasn't what she was most afraid of." She'd reached across the table and taken my hand, her skin soft and wrinkled over mine. "She was afraid he would keep it. She was afraid he would hold it over your head for the rest of your life. That he would use it as a weapon to control you, to make you bend to his will, to force you to accept his new life and his new wife, all under the threat of taking away your childhood home. She didn't sign that house over to you to protect a building, sweetheart. She did it to protect you. She wanted you to be free." And in that moment, the full weight of my mother's love, of her foresight, of her fierce, protective spirit, hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about property. It wasn't about money or revenge. It was about liberation. She had given me the key to my own cage. Now, standing in the middle of my warm, bright living room, surrounded by the easy, genuine laughter of people who truly loved and respected me, I raised my glass. "I just want to say thank you," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I was no longer afraid to show. "To my mom for giving me the foundation and for giving me my freedom. And to all of you for helping me build a home on it." I looked at Olivia, who smiled back at me, her eyes shining with a light that felt like coming home. I looked at Emma, at Pete, at Derek, at my grandmother. My father, in his desperate, hateful attempt to kick me out, had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover what a family, a real family, truly is. It wasn't about blood. It was about love, respect, and showing up for each other, no matter what. And that was an inheritance no one could ever take away. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours, even against the people who were supposed to be on your side? Share your story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next.